pass away. We have developing economies where the middle class is growing at an enormous rate. That means they're eating more food, higher, better quality food. We have advancements in technologies. We have changes of world ecology that are all affecting sustainability in our food production systems. So this is really an opportunity across agriculture to meet world requirements. We all have the ability to produce high quality foods that are safe, that are sustainable, and to me, agriculture is a long-term investment. No one in agriculture is there for a 5-year term. They're in agriculture for a very long period of time, multiple generations. And so by definition, agriculture is sustainable, or at least a good percentage of it is. But if we're going to expand our shrimp production, all sections of agriculture have to work. We need grains, we need feedstuffs to expand aquaculture for the world production. And if you look at sustainability of aquaculture, to me, this makes sense. From a protein production standpoint, aquaculture is the most efficient production of protein on an energetic basis. So poultry produces about protein to protein the same as aquaculture, but we're far more efficient from an energetic standpoint to produce protein. We also have the potential, it's not always done in aquaculture, to use very little water. We have closed system technologies. We have pond-based systems where there's no addition of new water. You're recycling all the water. We can use our water in freshwater systems as secondary crops, so we can use it to water crops. So we're not an end user necessarily of water, so that makes for a good thing. And then a lot of our production systems are multi-trophic level. They use natural productivity. Your shrimp, tilapia that are produced in Latin America, both of them use natural food sources. So they essentially are multi-trophic level production systems. And then of course we have access to marine environment, which is the biggest surface area of the earth, is to be able to produce in that marine environment. We have lots of strengths. Aquaculture's done very well. We have huge production of carp. We have huge production of tilapia, shrimp. Lots of protein, high quality protein is being produced through aquaculture. The problem is we also have some weaknesses. To me, the biggest weakness is our use of fish meal. And if you look at uses of fish meal, shrimp is the #1 consumer of fish meal in all of our feeds. We all know that shrimp go out there and grab fish and consume them, right? This is a factor of how we manufacture feeds, not nutritional requirements of the animals. But our shrimp industry is the biggest consumer of fish meal, and that is an issue. If you look at diets and how they're developed, I work in both Asia and Latin America, the Americas. There's big differences, and they're not right, they're not wrong. The way I describe it is it's kind of like kids arguing over which superhero is better. It could be Batman or it could be Robin. Neither's right, neither's better. It's just perspective. And if you look at Asia, they came from a perspective of very high fish meal diets, very high protein diets, and they have very much a salmon influence on their nutrition. If you look at the Americas, where we're at right now, we have lower levels of fish meal typically in our feeds. We have lower protein diets, and we have this influence more of catfish and tilapia. Neither of these feeding systems are right or wrong. They just have different perspectives. But if we want to be sustainable, we have to move away from marine ingredients, and we have to move towards our grain-based diets. And that means that we're using soy, it means we're using resources that are not only renewable, but we can expand them, all right? The biggest problem that I see with fish meal, and this shows it very simply, is that if you look at fish meal production, we're at 6 to 7 million tons of fish meal. Aquaculture uses about 65% of that, so that's about 4 million, 5 million metric tons. Production of oil seeds, if you look at soybean meal, it's 270 million metric tons. If you're going to take an industry that takes protein, converts it into another protein source, you don't want to base your industry on something that's 6 million tons. You want to base it on something that's 270 million, okay? It makes a lot more sense. Aquaculture cannot grow if it's basing itself on a fish meal-based protein source. We can't expand. There's no expansion of aquaculture in terms of fish meal use. So it makes sense to use soy. That's one of the primary protein sources out there. It's sustainable. If you look at U.S. soy, it's certified as being renewable, sustainable resource. So if you're going to that market, you can use that as part of that advertising. Now, it's a good protein source. It's not perfect, but it's well balanced, and it does a very good job. If you look at world production, so if you look at the FAO numbers that are maybe 5, 6 years old now, they indicated that aquaculture was somewhere around 40 million metric tons. At 4.5 million metric tons of fish meal, that means we're using about 8% fish meal in our feeds, is overall for aquaculture. If you use the current numbers, we're somewhere in the 50 to 60 million metric tons of feed for aquaculture worldwide. We're using about 15 million metric tons of soybean meal. That's 25% inclusion. If you look at fish meal, 4.5 million metric tons, that's 7.5% inclusion. So to me, fish meal is the alternative ingredient, and plant-based ingredients are actually the normal, because there's actually more plant-based protein sources in our aquaculture diets today as compared to what they were 30 years ago. If you look at the acceptance of soy in aquatic feeds, I view this as a continuum. We have animals that we work with here in Latin America especially, our Pacific white shrimp, our catfish, or tilapia, very tolerant of soy-based diets. They do very well on plant-based diets. Then you have other species that are not so tolerant. They require some animal protein, but they still tolerate very high levels of plant-based ingredients. And then you have a few species, which is really the minority, that have allergies, that have adverse responses to some of our plant-based ingredients. But those are a relatively few number of species. So we're actually very lucky, the species that we mostly produce, we can remove almost all the marine ingredients. And we've looked at this for a number of years. I mean, this goes back almost 20 years of research where we've looked at replacing marine ingredients in the case of Pacific white shrimp, the shrimp that you guys are growing. Just to go back in history, a good, 20 years ago, we started looking at the replacement of fish meal in the laboratory. We built out ways to do that in the laboratory using co-extruded products. It was one of the first reasons that we saw you could replace a lot of the fish meal. We took those results that were in the lab, transferred those out into pond production. We took out fish meal, replaced it with poultry meal so that you that want animal protein in your diets, you had an animal protein. We then took the poultry meal, took that out of the diet, and you ended up with a plant-based diet. It's almost no animal protein in those diets, and we went through pond production, full production cycles. That didn't convince a lot of people, so we looked at different soy sources and lab and outdoor production. We looked at different varieties, so we took high soy diets, used fish meal, we used poultry meal, we used pea meal, we used corn protein concentrate. We demonstrated out in pond production that you could do that. We looked at different stocking densities because people say, hey, I'm different stocking density than you. So we went from 20 shrimp per meter all the way up to 60 shrimp per meter looking at soy-based diets and demonstrated that they work. And then we wrapped it up with a summary. Now we do a lot of work with a lot of different ingredients. And what we're doing now is we're trying to look at the quality of different ingredients and correlating them with performance of the animals. So it's not that we want to go get, fish meal or soybean meal or corn gluten meal. So what's the characteristics of those meals and how do they affect the performance of the animals? And we're doing a lot of work in our labs with that. So we look at different characteristics of those meals, for example, trypsin inhibitor, protein digestion. We do these correlation analysis, so fancy statistics to try and group different ingredients. And then we can identify what the effects are. We're stuck. Apparently my statistics were too much for this computer, so we're going to look at this slide for a minute. Let's see if we can go. Nope. So apparently the computer really likes my statistics. It's thinking about it really hard. But we are able to look at different ingredients, take the different compounds of those ingredients, and magically, I've crashed. See what happens? All right. Are we rebooting this, or what are we going to do? we're dead. So can I get a little bit of help? Thank you. See if you can pull up the, it basically crashed. Ah. So we're able to take these ingredients and look at the compounds that make up those ingredients and look at correlations. So we've been very good at doing this. We've looked at this through growth trials, and we've looked at this through digestibility. But what we're working on is the ability to be able to take different ingredients and then look at the characteristics and identify which ones are going to be the best. Because there's differences in strain, there's differences in processing, there's lots of differences in terms of how an ingredient is produced. All right. This scooches down before. Go farther. Keep going. I'll just go. Or just pull it up and I'll go forward. Keep going. Farther. Farther, farther. Okay. So now we'll go fast forward if we can get it up again. All right. It's going to hit the same spot and crash. Yep, we're getting there. Let me see if I can cheat and fast forward. Technology. This is one of my favorite things. So we've got these correlations, as I said, and we can look at different compounds within those ingredients. For example, trypsin inhibitor, and look at correlations for digestibility. We can look at, we've got 20-some different sources of soy. So it's the same soybean meal, but from 24 different countries of origin and different places. And as you can see in this graph, we get different results based on the country of origin, based on the genetics, based on the processing. So what we're trying to do is come up with data that defines the best characteristics for those, in this particular case, soy. So through all this data that we've looked at, we can see there's different lines. So we can change the genetics and actually improve the products that we're using. And there's people doing that. We can change the processing and improve the product. And so there's lots of potential where we can manipulate both genetics and processing to improve these plant-based ingredients that are currently being used in feed formulations, something that we can't do with wild species. Well, we also do a lot of work with corn-based products, and the reason we use corn-based products is if you take your fish meal out and you move towards a soy-based diet, you're really high in lysine, and you're really low in methionine. So if you move to a corn-based ingredient, they have the opposite effect. They're high in methionine and low in lysine. So if you blend those two ingredients, you get a much better amino acid profile. So we do a lot of work where we'll blend different ingredients as replacements for fish meal or as protein sources. So just as an example, this is Distiller's Grains product. This is a new product that's on the market. The distillers people are changing how they produce things. This is a high protein Distiller's Grains, and we basically replaced it at increasing levels either with our corn protein concentrate or in this case showing you with fish meal replacement. We've done this in the laboratory. We do this in outdoor green water tanks. This is results from outdoor tanks, and there's absolutely no differences across the board. Feed conversion's good, everything's good. If you simplify this data, basically replacing corn protein concentrate with a cheaper ingredient, we have no differences in growth. Replacing fish meal, so this is about 15% fish meal down to 0, we have no differences in growth. Now these are lab-based diets, so this is a commercially produced open formula that we ran in our ponds, and we ran that also, and there's no differences there. So we can do a lot of manipulations to reduce the cost and improve what I'll say is the sustainability of our shrimp feeds for the future production. Another example, we heard talks about the higher densities. There's a lot of people interested in moving in high density. So this year we started working with higher densities of shrimp in these, you can call them biofloc or mixotrophic, whatever type of system you want to call it, but you're recycling a lot of nutrients within a green water bacterial-based system. So we started working with these. This is an example. And again, going from a high fish meal diet down to 0 fish meal, this is 120 shrimp per meter, so it's pretty good density. If you look at our results, in terms of biomass, there's almost no differences. There's a slight depression in biomass. There's almost no differences in weight gain, and there was a slight decrease in feed conversion. But again, this is going from 20% fish meal down to 0% fish meal. So even in these high density systems, we should be able to replace all that fish meal and take the vast majority of it out. Now, we may need to leave a little bit of fish meal or a little bit of animal protein, but we should be able to move that out. So across multiple species, there's lots of species, both marine and freshwater, where we can do these sustainable diets, where we can move to plant-based ingredients. The problem, in terms of sustainability, that's half the equation. You can have a really good diet, but if you don't have proper feed application, then you're going to have horrible results. If you have great feed application and horrible feed, you're going to have horrible results. So you also got to look at feed management. We do a lot of work with looking at feed management and the application of these diets. And again, there's kind of differences in perspective. If we're looking at Asia, you have more feeds per day. If you're looking at the Americas, you're looking at fewer feedings. It's just the way the systems have adapted, right? Neither's right, neither's wrong, they're just different. But if we look at our feed management, we really need to look at improving that. This is a big cost on your farm. This is a major area where you can have major economic improvements if you improve your feed management. And so we're changing densities, we're changing genetics, we're changing feeds. We need to continually evaluate that feed management that we're doing. In the case of the Pacific white shrimp, they use natural productivity very well. There's lots of studies that have been done that show that that animal will use natural productivity across many, many different kinds of culture systems. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'll give you one example. This is high-density mixotrophic system. This is at 500 PLs per liter. Look at the feed conversion. It's 0.7. Okay? The reason the feed conversion is so low is because this is a well-managed feed management system, and they're letting the animals use the natural productivity that's in the system as a secondary food source. They're managing for it, and that's a very key. If you have a species that'll use natural foods and you manage for that, you'll get improvements in your feed conversion. So when you look at feed management, there's a lot of different ways to do that. What I call observational, feeding trays. We can have pre-programming or program feeding where we use feeding tables. We can also, what I think a lot of farmers are doing is basically using magic. They really don't have anything. They're making an educated guess. All right, but most people, the guys that are good feed managers, use a combination of methods. And I want to take a few minutes just to talk about some of those. So if you want to understand feed management, you need to look at what's being done. So feeding trays, these are done a lot in Latin America and Asia, but they're very labor intensive. The feeding response works for some people, not for all farms, so it's not an answer for everybody. But the problem with the feeding trays is that you have a tendency, they don't always give you the right answer, and it's very difficult to interpret that answer sometimes. What size should that shape should that feeding tray be? How many do you need? How often do you need to check it? When you get results, how do you interpret it? Because the shrimp may have simply picked the feed up and dropped it off the tray, or he may have consumed it. You don't know. This is, an interpretation. There's lots of studies that looked at the use of feed trays. Most of them conclude it's a good tool, but you shouldn't feed all the food on the feeding trays. It's a good tool, but you need to use other management systems with it. Quite often, this is combined with broadcast systems, whether it's by hand or using automated systems such as a blower. Or it's used with feeding tables. And my problem with feeding tables is that a lot of times these feed tables are wrong. They're usually wrong at the upper end when the animals are large, 10 grams or larger. But if the feeding table has not been adjusted for your situation, you're not going to get the best results if you didn't adjust that. And what I often tell people is that, feeding tables, if they're done right, are good. But the problem is the animal's never read the feeding table, and he's going to do what he wants to do, okay? So if you look at traditional feed management, record keeping is critical. Those guys that get quality data, look at that data, do a very good job. But my problem with all of these methods is all of these are post-responsive. All of them are after the fact. This is like a doctor walking up to a dead body and asking him what's wrong. It's too late, okay? The ship has already sailed. All of these are looking after the fact. What we need to do is look at things that are more responsive in time. Now, I've spent a lot of my time looking at feed management. We've done a lot of different feed management. This is an examples of different feed management that we've done on our ponds. So we currently run at very low levels, but we've gone to very, very high levels using 2 feedings per day and done this over the last 16 years. So the things that we've observed is that if you're doing 2 feedings per day, you want to be conservative in your feed input. Going to higher levels of feed input does not work. But if you restrict the feed, the animals will use natural productivity, you get better feed conversions, and you'll still have very good growth rates. In fact, we've actually improved some of our growth rates by restricting that feed. But again, what we've done is every time we try and go up in feed, we've never gotten a good response. And we've always wondered, well, why is that? It's kind of like this. If I give you a huge amount of food, it doesn't mean you're going to eat more. It just means I gave you more food and you're wasting it, right? So if you want to think about what happens with shrimp and feed intake and growth, you need to understand what's going on. Hopefully this video will run. Let's see if it's going to go. So a lot of times people don't understand that fish are little pigs. This guy goes in there, there's lots of food around, he's going to grab 4 or 5 pellets, he's going to drop some of them, he's going to pick more up, and then he's going to swim off and eat a few of them. And so, look at this guy right there. He's got 5 or 6 in his pond, he's already dropped 3 or 4 of them. They're essentially sloppy eaters unless you restrict the amount of feed. But they are consuming a relatively small quantity of feed over time. They're not eating large quantities of food. If you look at what happens in a pond, we had a nice clear pond a couple years ago, so we threw some feed in there to see what would happen. Dropped a camera in there. You get a couple shrimp swimming around. You then take and throw some feed in there, and those shrimp are going to start coming to it. And what they're going to do is they're going to pick up that feed, and then maybe they're going to swim off. Maybe they pick it up. Maybe they drop it. But they're going to consume that feed. But it's being consumed relatively slowly. If you look at intake on shrimp, so this is over time. So we took different lengths of time and gave them access to food. And all you find out is that, gave them food in the water. We leached it for different time periods. So this is a feed that's never been leached. And then we have feed that's been leached for 30 minutes. So we put it in the water, let it get soggy, then we fed it to the animals. We did that for different time periods. And after about 30 minutes, you get decrease in performance of the fish. And this is kind of like soggy cereal. I don't think anybody out there likes to go eat cereal an hour after it's been in the bowl, right? The shrimp are the same way. You lose nutrients and you lose performance, okay? If you look at the consumption of the shrimp over time, so again, as time goes on, they're very slow at consuming the food. They don't eat a whole lot of food in one shot. They eat it very slowly. So if you only have food available for, let's say, an hour or so, that's all they're going to eat. Well, if you make that food available for another hour or so with a second feeding, that's all they're going to eat. You haven't given them the potential of what they can consume because that food is not really there. You may throw it in the water, but it's going to be soggy. It doesn't have the nutrients. So what you need to be able to do is give lots of little feedings that the shrimp then can consume. So you keep the feed fresh, and then the shrimp can also consume it. So if you look, there's been some studies with automatic feeders, and they've gotten very good results. The conclusions that they came up with, that if you use an automatic feeder, you allow more feedings. spreads out the nutrient load, and it also reduces the amount of labor to do those multiple feedings. Most people can't afford to feed numerous times. So if you look at what goes on in fish, there's lots of technologies available for fish, cameras, visual feeding. You know, you take a floating feed and you can very easily see what's going on. This is, you're responding right away to the fish or the animal, and you're feeding them on demand. You're giving them what they need, right? They're consuming it right away. Problem with shrimp is you can't see them. They're down in the water and you can't see what's going on. They're not coming up to the top. Well, the guys from AQ1 got very fancy. They figured out that actually shrimp would make a noise. And so what they've done is they've taken a technology where they take a hydrophone, put it in the water, put some feed out, and then those shrimp, when they consume that feed, they make a noise, okay? And so this actually seems to work very well. This is more of a responsive way of feeding. You can see what's going on. So as a demonstration, I'm going to see if you guys can respond like our shrimp. It's a very simple way to explain what's going on with the AQ1 system. So I brought some shrimp feed. It was made by Hershey, so don't worry, it's not so bad. It's almost pretty good. But let's see if you guys are as smart as a shrimp can be. So what happens with the AQ1 system is you guys, oh, she knows me, is the AQ1 throws out a little bit of food. So you guys who are not paying attention, time to get off your cell phones. So it'll take a little bit of food and it'll throw it out. Now, can you figure out how to get more? What do you need to do? There we go. So, yeah, see? So it goes and throws a little bit of a test food out. And then, okay. So there, see? You guys know how to get food. Who's the loudest? All right. All right. All right. Okay. I'm not taking the candy home. So let's see who can be the loudest. I'm almost done. All right. There we go. Here's my hungry shrimp. All right. So now you're going to have to be quiet. So my guys from AQ1 gave me let's see if we can get this to go. This is an example of what's going on. So what happens is these little blue lines is a feeder. So a little bit of feed goes out, the shrimp makes a noise. Throws out a little bit more when it gets a response. So let's quiet down. See if we can get this and see if we can. It's not going to work now. All right, well, yeah, if you want to try. There you go. Do it again. So that's the shrimp making noise. The very beginning of that, there's a shh, and that's the feed going out. So that's good. So what they're doing is they're using this response in real time to see what goes on with the shrimp. So 18 years, I'm still learning. We do a full production cycle at our facility. This is research. They're small ponds. I'm not going to go into detail. But over the years, we've done a lot of feed management. So we started looking at feeders. And there's lots of different feeders out there There's lots of different ways to put feeders out, walkways, put them out on, floats, put them fixed, run electricity. You can use solar. There's lots of different ways to run these. 2016, we started looking at these technologies for using automatic feeders, and I'd like to share those results with you guys. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the production, but basically the first year we hand-fed my best methods after 16 years of practice. We then used a timer feeder, and then we used the AQ1 system, and this was our first endeavor with that AQ1 system. We have small research ponds. There's 4 replicates. We basically use commercial, practices. We run a short nursery, about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. We stock our ponds. We run our production cycle. So in this case, we use a soy-based feed, this open formula that was produced by Ziegler. And we used our standard feeding method twice a day. Then we took and added 15% more, so 115% feed. Then we used an automatic feeder that ran 6 times a day. Then we used the AQ1, and we did limit the upper limit on the AQ1. Everybody was fed during the daytime to keep everything equal. So we got lots of water quality data. I got lots of publications already out on this, so if anybody wants data, it's out there. Here's the growth data. This is what you're interested in. Here's my 2 feedings per day. Not very fast. Here's my 15% overage. Didn't get any improvement. Go to 6 feedings per day, and we actually got a bump up, even though we didn't change the quantity. Just going from 2 to 6 feedings per day, we got better performance. Go to the AQ1, we got almost 50% more size and biomass on our animals. So here's our data for our yields. And you can say that they're pretty impressive. This is at 17 per meter, 3,000 kilos per hectare versus 4,500 kilos per hectare. So we got about 50% more in yield. We got a lot larger animal, and we still maintain very good feed conversions. You notice our feed conversions are very low because I'm very conservative on my feed management. Basically what happened, AQ1 put in more feed, you got a bigger animal versus these guys. All right, look at size distribution, get a much tighter size distribution compared to what happens with 2 feedings per day. So 2017, we continued this work. We did our standard hand feeding. We did timer feeding at 115 and 130% of this standard rate, and then we ran the acoustic system again. This year we ran at 38, which is our normal production cycle. There's my crew. All students. Realize this is done by students who've never done anything before. So again, ran through the whole production cycle. 2 feedings, 115 and 130%, and then the AQ1. So just to show you the data, here is my pre-programmed standard. Here's 15% overage. Here's another 30%. And then I plotted all the AQ1 points for the 3 ponds so that you could see it doesn't feed the same amount every day. It's going to adjust based on the real response of the shrimp. And that's key, is that it's instantaneous feedback from what the shrimp are consuming. That's the big advantage of this system. But again, you can see that we did top out because I did have an upper limit on it. We harvested, our normal production is 120 days. We are now harvesting at 90 days. So we've taken 30 days off the production cycle, right? Here's our 2 feedings per day. So this is my best standard management. Then we go to automatic feeders at increased rates, and then the AQ1. We're still outperforming with the AQ1 because it is, again, responding to the amount of food that those animals need. Now, production, amount of feed, here's our yields. This is a record for our facility, 7,500 kilos about per pond. So we're really producing more, and we are producing bigger animals, okay? And again, this is because of that automatic feeding system feeding on demand to those animals. People ask me, does it respond to survival? And I think it does. This is an example of where we had low DO event and then we had aeration failure. So during the low DO event, the feed was reduced so that the shrimp responded. Then we had a mortality event, and then we came out of that mortality event because an aerator basically broke. And then the AQ1 readjusted, and it adjusted back based on the new biomass. So it self-corrected itself, which I think is very good. So in 2018, we are running again. We have now converted to all automatic feeding systems. So we're now completely 100% automatic feeding. So with what I'll call as a timer feeding, we're doing 130% of my standard, 145 and 160%. And then we're also running the AQ1. This year we're running at 25 shrimp per meter. I backed off on performance or density because I want to get at maximum feed inputs. So this is running right now. So what we're seeing, and we've got one more data point that I didn't put up here, but basically the AQ1 is still outperforming, but we're running much better even than the 160%, okay? So what have we learned? Right now we're at 90 days, and our standard production is up to about a 30 to 35 gram shrimp. Our traditional was 120 days to 25 grams. And this is all because of the automatic feeder. It allows you to increase the number of feedings. It's all, allowed us to cut our production cycle. And I think we can actually, if we target a 25 gram shrimp, we can cut our production cycle to 60 days, okay? So my opinion, if you want to stay with your shrimp production, we need to shrimp the image to more sustainable systems, and we'll hear more talk about more sustainable production systems. And we need to move to automated systems because the automated systems respond to water quality, do feed management much better than the rest of us. And with that, it's your choice. You can stay with our old style of airplane, or you can fly home. I'm going home on a nice new airplane. I'm not going back to the Wright brothers. Or you can go back and use your dial-up phones if you want. I'm going to stay with my cell phone. So we're going to keep moving forward with technology, and with that, I'll thank you very much for your time.